When Breonna Taylor, emergency room technician, was shot and murdered by the cops that broke into her house with a no-knock warrant. And just for those who don't know who Breonna Taylor is, she's the emergency room technician who was asleep in her home at night with her boyfriend or watching a movie or something, basically in their home, in bed, when they hear some battering at the door. The door blows open. The boyfriend, who's there, tries to defend the house because, after all, someone just broke into the house. He fires a shot. A barrage of bullets come in his direction. Now, what they didn't know at the time, that these guys were actually cops, because the cops, apparently, by the overwhelming majority of the testimony, didn't announce themselves. And the person who believed he was defending the house apparently just shot at a cop, which apparently gave them all justice to basically unleash. Now, many of these bullets went elsewhere. The key here, or the catch here, is the no-knock warrant that these officers employed. I would say this is probably business as usual, even though the public is horrified by the results of this. You're throwing open an apartment door or banging into the door, knocking a door open. And in banging the door open, you live in the United States with the Second Amendment, and it doesn't occur to you at any point that, hey, if we're bashing down the door at the middle of the night, maybe the person inside may have a weapon, and that person may try to defend the house because we're, thugs knocking down a door. What ends up occurring in this case, as you all know, is that we waited, bated breath, and the prosecutor dragged this out. Attorney General Daniel Cameron, dragged this out. And finally, he comes back. The public is horrified by this, protests taking place constantly over it. And he comes back and says, we're going to charge one cop, the cop that didn't shoot her, meaning every other cop that was there that put a bullet in her walks. The guy who missed gets charged because he was reckless in his shooting. The people who murdered her, they weren't reckless. But the guy who missed was reckless because he missed. And the bullets could have harmed somebody else. Now, the catch here is the public looks at this and says, certainly they need to be prosecuted. This cannot stand. That needs to be prosecuted. Those people acted flagrantly, horrendously. Even the lying about, in order to try to come up with a pretext or to justify this, talking about, and by the way, the person who was responsible, or the person who they were supposedly looking for tangential or ancillary evidence for, was already in custody. So they decided to go bash down somebody's house in the middle of the night when they already had the person in police custody, and didn't even announce themselves at that. At least my belief is that they didn't announce themselves. There has to be consequences, right? Who's at fault? Who made the choice to knock down the door? Who gave them the authorization to do that? Was everything legit in that process? Because even if there was a technical lie by the officer, that in and of itself should be enough to say that they shouldn't have did that. Meaning, because of how horrendous the outcome of this, there should be consequences, especially if there's anything in it that is problematic. In this case, Daniel Cameron tells people on the 23rd that the grand jury didn't come to the belief that they should be charged. Cameron alleged that the grand jury agreed, quote unquote, that the officers who shot Taylor, Detective Miles Cosgrove and Sergeant Jonathan Matley, were justified in their actions, leading to a renewed protest demanding justice for Taylor. This is helpful. Hey, don't blame me. Blame the grand jury. What many people may not know is that a prosecutor can get a ham sandwich indicted if the prosecutor really wanted to get the ham sandwich indicted. Did you clog their arteries on purpose? Lock them up. Take ham sandwich away. If they wanted to. Grand juries are, these aren't necessarily complicated things. They can get, if he wanted it. Catches. Did he want it? Did the jury actually agree that none of the officers who shot and murdered her should be charged? Did they agree? Did they agree? He's basically putting the blame or the responsibility of that onto a bunch of anonymous human beings. In this specific case, though, those anonymous human beings were bothered greatly by the decisions that this prosecutor was making, and goes out and absolutely contests what the prosecutor explained, or at the very least what the prosecutor tried to depict as reality. And the jurors are basically telling a story that the prosecutor basically lied, that he was basically being deceptive when he came out and said that these guys agreed that the other people shouldn't be charged. It wasn't that they agreed, you just didn't offer the charges. That's what it was. The prosecutor didn't believe that the charges could stick, and so they didn't put those charges on those officers. But to turn around and say, well, it's the grand jury. Nonsense. The grand jury wasn't sitting by and allowing that to fly. And they're on Gayle King giving an interview. And what they're saying is rather fascinating. Now, the catch here, the question becomes, who is at fault? Is it the cops that decided they wanted to do the no-knock warrant? Is it the judge that gave the pretext to do it, or the right to do it? Is it the lying that gave the justification for it? Meaning something about the mailman gave them information or something like that, and the mailman said, yeah, I never did that. Who was at fault? Where's the technical fault? Because you could have a situation where the law itself is at fault, meaning all of these people doing everything that they typically do on a daily basis, which flagrantly disregards people's rights, knocking down doors. I would imagine it's normal, just like the murder of George Floyd. What was Chauvin doing? Chauvin was knee on a man's throat, casually killing a man, just looking around. Casually looking around. 8 minutes. Murdered a guy. My point is, this is not a bad apple. This is business as usual. And the catch here is trying to figure out who's at fault, gets to the root of this notion of your problem is the system itself. And yes, there are human beings functioning in that system and pushing the boundaries and everything else and flagrantly disregarding rights and so forth. But by the same token, it's an indictment of a system that would even allow a concept of a no-knock warrant inside of Second Amendment United States. I'm going to give you and show you some of the things that the grand jurors were saying. And yeah, they absolutely contest this idea that these guys just agree to it. Now, he may want to stretch the term agree, but it is taking Herculean effort in order to come to the conclusion that these jurors, at the very least based on what they're saying, agreed that no charges should be filed. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Look, I've covered this case, horrified by the case. And part of my horror wasn't just that they murdered the woman, but in part because I wasn't sure how they were going to charge him. Understand what I mean? This is the issue of the way we go about the policing functionality in and of itself in this country. The fact that he shot back, and then basically the prosecutor was going to say, well, if he shoots back, then officers have a right to defend themselves, even if they were wrong in their pursuits. And so, to me, the best outcome would have been for Breonna Taylor to be alive and those cops to not exist. The other outcome in this, however, is basically the law comes a different assessment, though. As a human being, I say it's wrong that they're bursting into her house. It's wrong that they're doing this in the middle of the night. It's wrong when they already have the person. The person didn't give him intel that says anything was at that house. All of those things were wrong. And so, no, I don't want anybody in that house injured for something they didn't necessarily do wrong. I want the people who are causing the harm to be harmed. That's the way I function in my head. The law doesn't think it that way. Cops are shot at. The cops can defend themselves with maximum justice. And that's what they did. Didn't even know where they were shooting or who they were shooting at. Maximum justice. They broke into the house. But yeah, they're going to stand their ground in somebody else's house. This is Gayle King. Now, the two jurors are anonymous. So they're only going to be Juror 1 and Juror 2. And I'm going to let you hear what they're saying. I think there are two clips. One talking about the prosecution itself, and the other one talking about the police action. Let's go to the first clip.
Can I ask you what you both think of the police behavior and actions that night?
Negligent.
Negligent?
They couldn't even provide a risk assessment, and it sounded like they hadn't done one. So their organization leading up to this was lacking. That's what I mean by they were negligent in the operation.
Number two?
They were criminal leading up to this, and everything that the way they moved forward on it, including the warrant, was deception.
Now, I suspect he said everything up to this, and in the way they moved on it, was deception. I think that's the mailman thing, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, it's like, look, these guys were lying all the way through this process. They were lying. Now, the catch is, and the argument that I make is, if there are any technical issues that you find these guys ran afoul of, then you should charge them with murder. The outcome is so drastic from the lives of the people who are affected by what they did, meaning that woman's death. I don't care if this is a George Floyd thing in the way that the cop was complaining. This is not George Floyd. It doesn't have to be George Floyd. If there's anything wrong technically in what you did, then you should be prosecuted. And the reason why I say anything wrong technically is because the law is going to protect these guys. And it's going to protect them by saying, hey, somebody shot back, despite the fact that they shouldn't have been there in the first place. So it is vitally important, if they were being deceptive, for that to be known. And so if the juror is making this point like, yeah, these guys were deceptive, listen to what else they were saying, though, because it sounds like those jurors agreed with me on the secondary part, which is, if there's any technical issue associated with what they did, then they should be prosecuted because of the outcome of the results. But in the case that they're saying, let's see if I can pull this up.
Yes, News.
All right. So the other part to this has to do with the prosecutor. Because the prosecutor is basically saying, look, the jurors agreed with me.
Identified on one mornings. The entire jury wanted to discuss more charges against the officer.
So
there we are. All right. So as the prosecutor say, okay, they thought the officers were justified. Well, these jurors don't say that. In fact, these jurors apparently say that the jury was horrified by what had happened. I'm adding horrified, but that they wanted additional charges. And I'm saying horrified. I'm interpreting horrified just based on the fact that they wanted additional charges. But that Cameron, Attorney General, wouldn't offer them, wouldn't put them up. Listen to this.
So when you all look, Juror 1 and 2, and you're told that the only thing you need to consider right now is wanton endangerment, did anyone say, hey, are there any other options here? Did either of you say that?
Almost the entire room.
Yes, everyone said that.
What was the answer that you were given?
Basically, in a nutshell, they said there were other possible charges that we considered, but nothing that we could make stick.
Truth. Hashtag truth. That's probably what's more true. Meaning the prosecutor, the attorney general, who understood that if he comes out and says, I couldn't do charges, that place was going to be burned to the ground. They understood it. They got it. They figured it out. And so what did they do? Drag the process out. Well, that didn't stop or cut back on the people who were protesting. And people kept saying, remember her name, Breonna Taylor, say her name. Meaning they kept her name alive, and they wouldn't necessarily let that case go. He comes out And he says, I'm going to push these charges. Now, you look at the charges and you immediately think, well, wait a minute. You're not charging anybody with murder. You're charging him for reckless shooting. The guy who missed, that's the guy you're charging. And it's unsatisfying, to put it mildly. And so when you're sitting in as a juror and they're giving you this stuff and the prosecutor is like, yeah, I can't make anything stick, so this is what I'm going to charge. And he comes out and he doesn't want to take that hit himself. I don't want to come out and say, no, I didn't offer this because I can't make it stick. Instead, I want to put it on the juror. However, that's probably more likely to be true. Meaning the prosecutor is probably thinking to himself, he shot back, so I can't charge the officers because the officers were defending themselves. That probably was his logic. And he thinks to himself, what can I make stick? And he thinks, can I make murder stick? Now, beyond whether or not he can make murder stick, there's also this thing of whether or not he even wants to prosecute this cop. 99% of the cops that are involved in killings, and there are 1,000 a year, walk. 1,000 killings a year, at least, by cops. 99% walk. 1%. And I think it's like 33% of that 1% gets jail time. So right off the bat, this is probably not something he wants to do anyway. And here we are. Here we are. He didn't have the courage to try that case. He didn't have the courage, apparently, to deal with the various issues of deception that's associated with getting those cops to that particular place and having them put a bullet in her life. None of those things were wanted to be dealt with. And then to come out and give this thing like the jury's agreed. The jury apparently didn't agree at all. And you had one juror to come out, and then you had another juror to come out to back up and cooperate what that first juror was saying. That sounds true to me. It has the ring of truth to me that the prosecutor said, I can't make anything stick. Astonishing. There is a fundamental systemic problem when something like this happens. And the prosecutor, the best that he can do, is charge the person that missed. It's charge the person that missed. I'll end this here. I don't want this one to be long, but aggravating. Because how do you ever change or challenge that system if you're not willing to bring consequences for behavior like this? And so, I don't care if it's not a racial thing in the way that the cop was saying, this isn't a racial thing. It doesn't matter. You kill somebody. And you kill somebody with bursting through their door like a fucking maniac. And then you're shocked as shit that the person shot back. Why wouldn't they shoot back? You're banging through their door like maniacs. Like, share, subscribe.